anthropology instead of art history, and traditionally anthropologists have dealt with it pretty extensively. So I'm presenting, I have here 4 different books, and they all have sort of a different focus and a different emphasis. And one of the first books I started with was this small book. This Eric Kelgren, How to Read Oceanic Art, is the curator of this material at the Metropolitan Museum. It's a really pretty thin book. It's an easy read. But one of the good things about a recent book like this is that they usually have a good bibliography. And once you start out with a recent book, the bibliography that's been selected by that author can really help be useful and can really help lead you into other sorts of material. So that's one way to start to learn about a topic that basically, let's say, you know nothing about or very, very little about, is to start with a recent book, a recent overview that's kind of an introduction, at more or less the introductory level, and then use that bibliography to go on and read further about different aspects of the art, whatever you're interested in. It turns out that this guy, Nicholas Thomas, he's British, he's associated with the British Museum. He's a very key figure. Just about every book that's come out on these topics has him, not either as a lot of them are edited, so he's one of the authors or one of the editors, and his name comes up quite a bit. So already like about 20 years ago, he wrote a very, a fairly brief, quite concise overview of this material as he understood it at that point in time, given the state of the literature. So these Thames and Hudson books, the World of Art series, are very useful, and they're written for you folks. They're written not for scholars or specialists or anything like that, but they're written in a way to introduce people to a topic. So these are also a good way to start learning about any kind of a topic that we're interested in. So these 2 books are now a little bit more complete. They're a little bit more detailed, especially the Art in Oceania, New History is one of these, pretty thick book, and it's divided up by regions, which is actually more and more common for this field. And we'll start, if you start to be interested in New Guinea and the sea pick, or in Hawaiian art or something like that, you can go into one of these larger books, and it's subdivided according to, well, sometimes it's periods, sometimes it's regions, but there's definitely big categories and subdivisions. And the Pacific Arts, Kepler is just a really pretty, a very well-respected scholar. She was at the Bishop Museum, which I'll mention in a minute, and then into the Smithsonian. So her study is just very solid and very respectable. So if I were, beginning to want to learn a little more about this, I would start with the Nicholas Thomas Thames and Hudson book. And what I've been doing as I've started to read more is I've been purchasing these books used online, and they're very, very cheap because nobody reads books anymore. And really, of course that's a joke and an exaggeration, but there's a lot of books that are floating around that people, for whatever reason, they don't want them anymore. The libraries deaccession books. So what I do, because I'm presenting this material and I'm working on this, for you to put together for you. I like to own the books that are really important to me because I highlight them. I highlighted them, and I use Post-its, and I take notes in different ways. So if I have the book in my library and I read it at my leisure, and then I keep it, and then it's highlighted, then I can go back and I can incorporate it into a PowerPoint like I'm going to do here. So that's one suggestion. But really, your local libraries are very helpful, and usually they're parts of consortiums, so you don't even have to really necessarily be associated with the university library. And pretty much any good public library can bring in any book you really want to read if they don't have it in their collection, which they probably don't, because again, libraries have cut back on their books, and not collecting in the same way. So that's just kind of a way of going at it, and you might want to even take a look at if you're interested in something, take a look at the book first before you decide to buy your used copy. And if you're not in a rush, they really, really are very cheap. I mean, some of them, we're talking about under $10 for a lot of really good books, and because they've been, if they're used, they're sort of gently used, and they're just, people are not collecting and reading books the way they used to do. So anyway, so that's sort of the way I go about things for topics, and we can talk more about them for different topics. So this is a big topic, oceanic art. And first of all, what is Oceania? Well, we're sailing through it right now. I mean, it is vast. The Pacific Ocean, that's covering a third of the Earth's surface. We can go up to the top deck. I mean, we're just very, very, remote from major land masses. There are many different peoples. It's an estimated of 1,800 different tribal groups that comprise Oceania, 25,000 islands, not including New Zealand, Australia, the larger ones, but there's all these, multiple islands. So the whole idea of Oceania has been subdivided out into Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia here, and we're just talking about this suffix, nesia meaning group of islands, which I'm assuming, but anyway, Polynesia here. Micronesia, I actually found less information on those islands in Micronesia, more on Melanesia and New Zealand and New Caledonia. So we're going to be sailing right through this. Well, we're in the midst of it right now. We're coming through this area. So the Society Islands, which are Tahiti, and then I can't see it from here. The Cook Islands through here. We're going to Fiji, right, and then Vanuatu, New Caledonia. So we're just moving right through from Polynesia, Melanesia on this particular cruise. And it is a vast, vast area. So first of all, you have this one term, Oceania, which encompasses a multiplicity of peoples and islands and regions and spaces and all that. And then we also have this term art. That's my topic, oceanic art. And art in this region is really, we have to think of it really differently than we think of art associated with somebody like Gauguin. So the Western concept of art is associated usually with an individual creator. We have names, we have dates. It's not useful. Gauguin's paintings were objects of beauty. They were aesthetic objects. They were meant to be collected and looked at. They didn't have any function or use specifically, but art in these regions that we're talking about here are used in a variety of ways, in a variety of contexts. So the more you know about the culture, the civilization, and the ways the objects are used, the more you understand what they're about. So objects are not like isolated aesthetic works like you would see in a museum. They're not meant to be that way. They've been collected and placed in museums, but originally they had a strong context within the culture. And we're also going to include, I'm also going to include, because all the books really do include it, is tattooing. And some authors make the point that tattooing is like the major art form of this whole region, tattooing. So it's very different, it's a whole different concept of what constitutes art, what you're going to define as art, what you're going to include in the discussion, as opposed to what we did yesterday with Gauguin. I mean, I didn't have to start defining what is a painting for you. We know what those are. And we're very familiar with that, I would assume, pretty much. We go to museums and all that. But it's different here. So that's just another aspect of how you have to kind of rethink some of the parameters of what we're looking at compared to art in the Western context. So you have that. And